Okay, so you sent in some pretty heavy stuff about the 2011 Grand Rapids shootings,
Yeah.
and we're going to take a deep dive into that today. I mean, not just what happened, but like really trying to understand it, piece it all together. We've got articles, we've got reports, all kinds of stuff that should give us a really good picture.
Yeah, and what I find so interesting looking at all these sources together is how they really do tell a story.
Hmm.
And a pretty tragic one, but, we're going to connect the dots, look for those key events, and try to figure out what really happened that day in Grand Rapids.
Absolutely. So July 7th, 2011. I mean, this was a day that really shook Grand Rapids to its core, right? It wasn't just one thing. It happened in multiple places, started in the afternoon, and it went on late into the night. We're talking shootings, a huge police chase, a hostage situation, and the perpetrator ending his own life. It was a horrible, horrible tragedy.
And 7 people died, right? 7 innocent people.
Yeah, 7 people were killed and 2 others were injured.
It's amazing when you look at how it all started. It just throws you into like the chaos and the speed of how it unfolded. Like that first call came in around 2:30 in the afternoon. It was from Rodrick Dantzler's own mother. She told the police that he'd called her and told her he'd shot his wife. I mean, that one phone call sets off this whole chain of terrible, terrible events.
Yeah. And so the police, they immediately went to Dancer's home,
Yeah.
right, on Janes Avenue Northeast, but he wasn't there.
Nope, not there. And very quickly after that, the true horror of the day started to emerge with the discovery of those initial shooting scenes.
Yeah, just absolutely awful.
There were 2 main locations for those first murders, according to the sources. So the first one was a house on Plainfield Avenue, also northeast. That's where they found his former girlfriend, Amanda Empkins. She was killed there. But it gets so much worse. I mean, Amanda's sister, Kimberly Empkins, was also killed there. And Kimberly's 10-year-old daughter, Marisa Empkins.
Oh my.
I mean, can you imagine that? And there's this detail that just really gets me. Kimberly, the sister, she had also dated Dantzler at some point, that they hadn't been in touch recently. Makes you think about the scope of his rage, just how far back it went.
It's chilling. And then there's that second scene on Brunel Court Northeast. This is where his estranged wife, Jennifer Heron, was found, along with their daughter, Camry,
Mm.
and Jennifer's parents, Thomas and Rebecca Heron. I mean, he didn't just target past girlfriends, he went after his whole family.
What's really striking about that Brunel court scene is that they found a completely empty 12-shot magazine there. It's not just evidence. It's like
Yeah.
it tells you how much violence happened in that one spot. I mean, 12 shots. That suggests a level of rage that was just, I don't know, uncontrolled maybe.
It's just unimaginable. And then on top of all that, around 3 p.m., this seemingly random thing happens. Near Godfrey Avenue and Oxford Street Southwest, this man, Robert Poor, was shot. They're calling it a road rage incident.
Yeah, it's almost like a sideshow to the main horror, but it's still horrifying, right?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if his anger was just spilling out onto anyone he encountered. And the thing is, Mr. Poor, he actually survived.
Yeah, really lucky.
Yeah, and you know why? Because he had a titanium pleat in his nose from some previous thing. Like, talk about fate.
Crazy. It's almost unbelievable. So at first we know Dantzler was driving a Lincoln Town car,
Yeah.
but then he ditched it and then carjacked his Chevrolet Suburban. I mean, that shows you he was really trying to get away.
Oh, yeah. He was on the run, no doubt. And around 7 p.m., we see him targeting someone he knew again. It was his friend, April Swanson. She actually called the cops to say he was following her in his car.
Mhm.
And then he shot her. It was at Fulton Street and Division Avenue. She was hurt pretty badly, but thankfully she lived. But then the sources say he also shot at some random pickup truck, didn't hit anyone. But, I mean, this is chaos.
Yeah, pure chaos.
Mm.
And that's when the police finally caught up with him, right? They rammed his car, and there was this whole shootout. Amazingly, none of the officers were hit.
Yeah, talk about brave, those officers. And then the chase was on, high speed through downtown Grand Rapids, onto I-196, then US 131, and then finally onto I-96 heading east. I mean, he was really trying to get away. It says he even crossed over the median, driving the wrong way, before he finally crashed around 7.15.
And then, even after all that, it still wasn't over. He got out of the car and ran into this house on Rickman Avenue Northeast. And that's where he took those 3 people hostage, Joyce Bean, Steve Helderman, and Meg Holmes. The thing is, he didn't even know them. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
The police negotiators, I mean, they must have been under so much pressure. They managed to get Joyce Bean out around 9:30. They gave Dantzler some cigarettes and Gatorade, and she was able to get away. But, the sources also say that during the negotiations, Dantzler was really upset and talking about suicide. It's so sad. So finally, at 11:30 p.m., it's over. He's in a closet with Steve Helderman, and he shoots himself. Just a tragic end to a tragic day. Meg Holmes was also in the house at the time.
Trying to understand why this all happened, we need to look at Rodrick Dantzler himself, right? I mean,
Yeah.
who was this guy? So he was 34 years old, and the sources, they paint this picture of someone with a history of violence. I mean, it started when he was young. In 1992, he was convicted of burglary when he was still a minor.
Oh, wow.
And then as an adult, in 1997, he was convicted of domestic violence and destroying property.
No.
That landed him in prison. He got out in 2005. But then in 2010, he went back to prison for assault and battery. I mean, you see this pattern, this escalating pattern of violence. It's a big red flag.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, why did he do it? The police, they think he was going after his ex-girlfriend specifically, and it seems like his separation from his wife was probably a major trigger, like maybe he just snapped. And then there's the mental health aspect. It seems he was bipolar and wasn't taking his meds. He was actually on disability because of it. And his mother, she described him as having this really, really bad temper, like explosive, she said. And apparently on the day of the shootings, he was using cocaine and alcohol and had a history of alcohol abuse. That combination, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster.
So tragic.
Mm.
This just shows how mental health problems, substance abuse, and domestic issues, I mean, they can just come together in the worst possible way. And, there's this detail that really sticks with me. It says that right before all this happened, he actually took his wife and daughter to Michigan's Adventure, this amusement park. But then, in the week leading up to the shootings, his wife said she wanted to separate, and she wasn't even staying at their home. I mean, you could just imagine the turmoil, what must have been going on in his head.
It's mind-boggling. So the gun he used in all this was a 9mm Glock 19 pistol. And get this, it had been reported stolen 2 years earlier. Nobody knows how he got it. And that, that raises all these questions about access to illegal firearms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, before we wrap this up, we really have to remember the victims. 7 innocent people lost their lives. Amanda Emkins, 27 years old. Her daughter, Marisa, just 10 years old. Kimberly Emkins, 23. Jennifer Heron, 29. Jennifer's daughter, Camry, only 12. And Jennifer's parents, Thomas and Rebecca Heron, 51 and 52. And let's not forget the 2 people who were injured, Robert Poore and April Swanson. Their lives were forever changed by this.
What I find so moving is the community's response. I mean, right away, there were flowers and memorials outside the house on Plainfield Avenue. It was heartbreaking.
People were pouring out their grief and shock on social media, and there was even this, thank you note to the Grand Rapids Police Department written in chalk on the sidewalk outside their building. That's amazing. And Huntington Bank, they started accepting donations for the victims' families, and then that very next night, hundreds of people gathered for a vigil at On Baldwin Park. I mean, the community really came together.
Yeah, and it didn't stop there. In the following days, there was a benefit to help pay for the Emkins family's funeral, and Mayor Hartwell, he publicly praised the police department for how they handled the whole thing. It must have been so incredibly difficult for them. There were church services all over the community and separate funerals for the Emkins family, the Heron family, and even for Rodrick Dantzler. It's remarkable how people come together in times of tragedy.
It is. But, there is this one weird thing that happened afterward. The footage from the police cars, like the dashboard cameras, during the chase, it ended up on this show called World's Wildest Police Videos. And it said they didn't show the hostage situation or Joyce Bean being rescued. They just cut straight to Dantzler's suicide. I don't know, it just seems kind of, exploitative maybe. Like they took this tragedy and turned it into entertainment.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It's a strange thing. After looking at all this, after this deep dive into these shootings, I'm just left with this feeling of sadness and this sense of how complicated it all is. It makes you think about all the victims, all the families that were torn apart, and the scars that these kinds of events leave on a whole community. It's heavy stuff.
It really is. And I think it brings up all these important questions about mental health, domestic violence, guns, and the trauma that just ripples outward from these kinds of tragedies. So, what are your final thoughts on all this? What should our listeners be thinking about after we're done here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we can't just focus on the headlines, We have to remember that every story like this, every statistic, it's about real people with real lives and real families who are left to deal with the aftermath. We need to try to understand the deeper issues that lead to these kinds of tragedies, not just the immediate events.
So true. I completely agree. We can't just look away, you know? We need to be aware and we need to support each other, and maybe, just maybe, we can help prevent something like this from happening again.
Exactly. We all have a role to play.
Absolutely.
And on that note, I think we can wrap things up.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it.
Until next time.
Take care.